Now, there are going to be times in campaigns, especially a long term one, where maybe it just seems like everybody's doing the same thing all the time. It might be just combat after combat, or maybe it's just a lot of exploration or a lot of fact finding and research. There are times when kind of any campaign can kind of feel like a drag. There are things that you can do both as a player and things you can do as a game master in order to try and re-engage the table, and that would be playing to the character's strengths and playing to the character's weaknesses. Now, my name is Don. I'm trying to be the Sly Strategist, and let's go ahead and get into it. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is playing to the strengths of the player characters. You can play on the character's classes, you can play on the character's skills to try and engage or re-engage the players into the world. Or, if you're a player, you can lean into some of the actions or activities that you don't use very much in order to get the table re-engaged. Maybe you have a martial character that is kind of not necessarily complaining, but is saying that they feel like all they do is stride, strike, strike, or demoralize, strike, strike. Well, you can spread out the combatants and make them move. Maybe you can include an opponent that moves, dodges, or does one of those teleport actions like a slip upon a strike, damage, or movement. Another good way to do it is you can move the combat onto elevated platforms and have that combat occur so that more movement has to take place, or that they have to deal with ranged enemies as well as martial characters in melee. Or you can have the combat happen at different vertical levels with walkways and terraces. You could also do things like maybe change the dynamic, give a character with a high intimidation outside of combat a chance to stare down an opposing party while walking in the street, or maybe let the face of the party use their high diplomacy to work through the encounter without getting into a combat. There are a bunch of things that players have as skills that aren't just there when they're in the middle of an encounter. There are things that they can do in their downtime. There are things that they can do in exploration mode with these skills, with these abilities, and with these things that make up their character. Some examples of this are if you have a character with a high deception, maybe introduce a non-player character that tells the players that they need to retrieve some negligible or personal object from a public house, a temple, or a market, but they can't be seen as a member of the party or maybe associated with the NPC that's kind of giving them this little micro quest. It really doesn't have to be consequential at all. It could just be something maybe to increase their reputation. But those player characters will have to come up with a plan to maybe do something like impersonate someone to retrieve it. And then you can require an attempt to palm an object or to steal that object in that situation in order to get them to use some of these skills that they have. Or going back into encounter mode, you could have a seemingly friendly or cordial, or maybe an unassailable creature that the players have to convince, intimidate, or charm in order to overcome, or maybe not even overcome, but even to get them to engage in combat so they can move forward. Then you have things like players who aren't using the skills that they have that might be part of the class. Suppose you have a rogue that just hasn't been doing too much roguing lately. Well, maybe include a weak trap into an item to remind the thief that they are built for doing this. All these little micro quests and actions can re-engage a player who feels like the sessions are all becoming the same by introducing new challenges that, if you take them one at a time, aren't very consequential, but it does remind the player a little bit as to why they're playing the game and what else their characters can do besides stride, strike, strike. Now, the second thing I'd like to talk about is playing to a character's weakness. This can be maybe a little bit harder or requires a little bit more creativity, and this is a strong skill for a game master. It's a little bit harder as a player to do, but there are things that you can do. You can also scour your players. If you're a GM, you can scour your players' character sheets and see what skills they aren't good at and kind of include challenges in that. Maybe you don't have any players with survival training. Well, introduce a situation, not death-defying, but that would require them, if they had a player that had a good survival skill, could get them through easily, but because they don't, they have to come up with a creative way to get around the situation. Once again, I wouldn't make it something that is really going to affect the story, but it's a way to get them to re-engage back with the table. Then you can also pull up the characters' backstories. You can look to the backstories that they submitted way back in your session 0 and find some information on the character's personal weaknesses and maybe pain points and make the campaign more personal to them. If a current situation is similar to a part of a character's backstory, let's say that there is some evil creature that is oppressing a nation or oppressing a town, well, maybe one of the players had something similar happen in their backstory. Let that put a personal edge to the play style of the characters. And if you're a player, you can also think about, hey, this is something I wrote about way back when. Maybe I need to think about this and see how this is now something that really matters to me. Or the GM can go ahead and try to tie the current situation to a player's backstory. Maybe the player might have a large family, or maybe they have no family at all. Well, you can use the non-player characters in your campaign to help engage the players by presenting a similar dynamic. And if it's the player who sees a similar dynamic, well, they can re-engage the table and maybe seek the support of the fellow players and try and have them come in and swoop in to support you. If you're the GM, you can go ahead and present this and maybe remind the players that this is something similar to something that happened to one of them, and try and bring that table back together in order to get things going. Now, I do want to totally respect the fact that there are tables where role playing isn't that big of a deal. Now, these role playing videos kind of aren't for those type of tables, and there's nothing wrong with playing that way, nor is there anything wrong with playing a totally role playing table. But these are ways that if you want to be a role playing table, maybe you can help re-engage that table if it's dropped off a bit, or if you've just had a session or sections of the campaign that just really didn't support a lot of it. This is a way to kind of remind everybody what you're there to do. The strengths and weaknesses of the players can really give both the players and the game master a look into just what might make these particular players tick and maybe make them interested in the story again. Now, I do hope you did enjoy this video. I enjoyed making it. I do like these role-playing videos. But if you did like this video, please feel free to like, subscribe, or hit that notification bell to be notified of any videos that are coming up or any lives that are going to be coming up. But whatever you do, I hope you have a great day and happy adventuring. Thanks.